I guess they are not hearing. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll invite you to pick up your headsets. We are going to start the event. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you very much. My name is Bruno Brazil. I represent the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock in Brazil, and I'll be moderating this panel today. Today we're going to talk about the impacts of bioinputs on mitigating nitrous oxide emissions in agriculture, sustainability and economics with biological nitrogen fixation. And to join us in this first session, we are going to have three speakers that are going to make brief presentations followed by a round of questions and answers. But before starting that, nitrous oxide comprises roughly 6% of our greenhouse gas emissions and is the most abundantly emitted ozone-depleting substance. About 3/4 of all nitrous oxide emissions come from agriculture, especially the use of fertilizers, manure management, and burning of agricultural residues. This panel will discuss the importance of nitrous oxide mitigation and highlight the potential of bioinputs, particularly inoculants and biological nitrogen fixation techniques, as cost-effective alternatives to chemical nitrogen fertilizers, especially in non-leguminous crops such as forages, maize, and wheat. Thank you all for your presence, and I'll invite Dr. Tariq Aziz. He's connected online to make our first presentation today. And Dr. Aziz serves as Regional Director of South Asia at the International Nitrogen Initiative and holds the position of Associate Professor of Soil Science at the University of Agriculture in Faisalabad, Pakistan. You're welcome, Dr. Aziz. I leave you the floor to make us the presentation.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Respected speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Am I quite audible and the screen is visible? Am I audible?
Dr. Aziz.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you well, Dr. Aziz.
Okay, great. I'm honored to join this panel and discuss on the critical issue of nitrous oxide mitigation. With the recent launch of global nitrous oxide assessment, it is clear that nitrogen pollution is a global concern impacting climate, food security, health, ecosystem, and biodiversity. And why it is important? Mitigate nitrous oxide emissions or the abatement, why it is important. Thank you, Bruno. You have discussed that this is the third most important greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, which has 273 times higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. And it has more than 100 years of atmospheric lifespan. So it can contribute to both climate change and ozone depletion. And if we see the current nitrous oxide emissions, they are almost equal to some of all other ozone depleting substances weighted by ozone depleting potential. So this is alarming. And if we see the recent past history, the nitrous oxide concentration has been increased significantly, nearly 40% when compared to only 1980. So this is a huge increase. And the efforts towards decarbonization, like the use of ammonia as a fuel, or the shipping industry, or going towards biofuels, they are very good for climate change, climate action, but they may result in increased nitrous oxide emissions, so we have to consider. And if we see the sector which is responsible for nitrous oxide, about 70% or more than 70% comes from agriculture sector. And in agriculture, more than 90% are directly related to the use of synthetic fertilizers, as you can see on the right side panel. As the fertilizer use has been increased in agriculture, the nitrous oxide concentration has been increased. And there is a significant increase after 1960s. And giving the importance to agriculture, delivering ozone layer and the climate benefits, as well as the other ecosystem and health co-benefits of ambitious nitrous oxide mitigation, it can only occur if agriculture is central to abatement efforts, because 70% is related to agriculture. In recent, this global nitrous oxide assessment, as well as the international nitrogen assessment, which is going to be launched in 2025, we have conducted various scenarios. And if the reference scenario means all of the practices or the policies which are current, they are continuous, then there is a risk of increase of 30% of nitrous oxide emission by 2050, and it can go beyond 100% by 2100 relative to 2020. And if we go using all of the technical available technologies or the practices currently, which are available currently, the emissions can be reduced up to 15 to 20%. However, if we go towards societal change as well, in addition to the technical reductions, which consider additional transformative change, including dietary shifts, reducing the animal-based proteins and shifting towards plant-based proteins. It has a promise to decrease the nitrous oxide emissions by 40% by 2050, and it can go beyond 60% in 2100. So this is there is a huge opportunity that we can reduce the nitrous oxide emissions. And in addition to this, it has also a multiple co-benefits, like without action on nitrogen, we cannot achieve net zero. And it can, you can say, ambitious nitrous oxide abatement could avoid 235 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is almost equal to 6 years of emissions from fossil fuel burning. And additionally, having nitrogen waste, which is a campaign, United Nations global campaign, it can offer about $300 billion per year innovation opportunity to stimulate green recovery. And the various benefits through cleaner air, water, stratospheric ozone protection, and biodiversity conservation are additional to all of this. So we see the health impacts are the impacts on air quality. By using these scenarios, we could avoid 20 million premature deaths globally by 2100, and the cost which we can save on the health, it may goes beyond $1 trillion annually. So this is a huge benefit. And we see the benefit in agriculture sector because nitrous oxide is a component of global nitrogen cycle. So if we work towards reduction of nitrous oxide, automatically the ammonia emissions, the NOx emissions, the leaching, and the runoff will be decreased. And because of this decrease, there is a huge impact on the climate, ecosystem, biodiversity loss, as well as they can result more yield, as well as the nitrogen use efficiency. And if we compare cost and benefit, you can say the comparison of the selected measures, the cost of implementation of the strategies is quite low than compared to the benefit costs. And it may vary among the various regions. And the takeaway message from all of this, that some of the monetized human health ecosystem, climate and benefits are about 10 times higher than the estimated gross or the net agronomic implementation cost. The fertilizer cost saving will be high in areas where there is application rates are high with low nitrogen use efficiency like South Asia or the China. And yield benefits will be high in sub-Saharan Africa where there is less application of nitrogen. And ecosystem benefits will be high in China, North America, Europe, where there is more nitrogen losses through leaching, through these emissions. And conclusively, the mitigating nitrous oxide is essential for climate, food security, health, ecosystem, and biodiversity. And in international nitrogen assessment, which is going to be launched in 2025, we have classified available technologies in various sectors, available measures in various sectors. And just an example of these is given in this assessment, like for the crop sector, there is a number of available technologies which are robust, which needs The technical requirements, high, basic, or the low. So we can do it. This is doable. Just we need immediate action. So thank you very much for inviting me and for having the sponsorship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aziz, for this insightful presentation. Now I welcome to the floor here Dr. Marcelo Morandi. Marcelo is a researcher at the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa, and also the head of the Embrapa International Relations Office. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Bruno, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a little bit on. I'll share here today a study that we did in Brazil on the use of bioinputs for biological nitrogen fixation on grass. We have a well-established biological nitrogen fixations for legumes like soybean in Brazil, but not for grass. Yeah. So this study was based on how is the potential to get the use of biological nitrogen fixation on grass. This was conducted in an international cooperation project with different partners here. And in the next few minutes, I will try to address in these three general questions here on what is the biological nitrogen fixation contribution for sustainable soil health and reduction of nitrogen oxide emissions on grass. How is the status of the development of use of this technology for grass and the opportunity and challenges to expand this use. Okay. First is just to say that Brazil is leading the adoption of bioinputs in general, not only for nitrogen fixation, but for other use, for pest control, for phosphorus recovery, and some other issues for plant growth, promotion, and so on. So Brazil has a tradition on use of bioinputs, has a well-established scientific groups working on that, and to have a well-established industry that are growing on to produce and to deliver new products and new opportunities to use bioinputs. We have some of these products that are already being used on grass. Okay. I will just go on here because Dr. Zarik showed the importance of this reduction of the use of nitrogen, of chemical nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen on agriculture, so we can go through to and go direct to the studies. The study was divided on three main steps, looking for what is there currently, the use and the products that are being used in Brazil, how the new technologies are arriving, and in long term, how does research are being prepared to improve the use of this kind of products. So including inoculants, biofertilizer, and biostimulants. Okay. So the current in Brazil, we found 54 products that are claimed to help to reduce the use of nitrogen for grass in Brazil. Mainly, or half of these products are being used in corn production, but there are some other for wheat, for rice, for grass, for animal feed, and for sugarcane, and for other use. But the mainly are based for corn production. And they are mainly based on microorganisms such as Azospirillum basiliensis. The great majority of these products are based on Azospirillum, but there are some other microorganisms with great potential that are being used and has products that are in the market based on Pseudomonas and on different species of bacillus. And these products are not specifically for nitrogen fixation, but at least 34% of that, or 34 from 54, claims that they can be used for reduce the nitrogen input for crop production. And some other use like growth promotion, improvement in stress response, like drought periods, solubilization of nutrients, especially here for phosphorus. In Brazil, we have the phosphorus is very hard to the plant to absorb direct from the soil because of the activity of the soil. So these microorganisms can solubilize and make available for plants. Okay. When we look for what are coming for the midterm, we found some at least 40 documents that are being in the patent files that will be arriving to the market as soon as possible. So this is mainly from private companies, but there are some from universities and some other research institutes, at least 15% of them, that are new products or new technologies that can be used for nitrogen fixation. And here there is a great novelty that is the use of groups of microorganisms, not only isolate microorganisms, but groups of them that can work together to reduce stress on plants, to promote growth, and to reduce or to make more efficient use of nitrogen, so the plants require less nitrogen to the same level of productivity, same level of yield. Okay. And looking for the future, we have a lot of different groups working on articles and for new research to improve new technologies for the reduced use of nitrogen on grass. This is still concentrated on corn production, but there are some studies going on pastures, on sugarcane, and for wheat too. And this is a part of these studies is already claiming for the reduction of emissions for nitrogen oxide by these microorganisms. So, but this is still concentrated on the same groups of microorganisms. So we are not seeing in the long term a diversifying of new technologies beyond these well-known microorganisms like Azospirillum and Bacillus groups that are doing this process. Okay. And here we propose some scenarios on how these technologies can help to reduce the emissions of nitrogen nitrous oxide from the fertilizers. So we use 3 scenarios considering the present, the planning to use for the 36% to 42%, and the potential if you could use in 100% of our grass production in Brazil. Okay, considering these plants: corn, sugarcane, wheat, rice, and pasture. Okay, and we use some premise of these emission factors that are looking like that. So here are the results. So maybe this is the most important slide here. Yeah. if you go to these three scenarios, the actual, the currently, the future, and the potential one, you can save up to 7 million tons of nitrogen fertilizers being applied if you get 100% of use in Brazil of this. This can be from 7 to 18 million tons of CO2 equivalent that will be not emitted annually. And we have another, on the economic side, the reduction of 1.8 to 5.1 billion dollars on not use of buying nitrogen fertilizers. So we can have these potential results in these different scenarios. So, but we have some challenges and some problems on that. So I just listed here in 4 areas. In research and development, on education, on product development, and on regulations. So these are important challenges that we still facing to get this best scenario, that is the use of the nitrogen biological fixation on 100% of our grass. But this challenge can be overcome with some new investments and some new actions to invest on this way to reduce the nitrogen emissions. Okay. So thank you. You can find the whole study here. You can download from here. The Portuguese is already available, and the English version is coming, but it will be at the same site here. Okay, and we have some training course on use of biologicals. So there are someone that is in English and in Spanish. So you can follow these other QR codes to find some e-learning training on how to use biologicals in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morangi. Now I'll welcome to the stage Dr. Tak Sapkota. He will present to us the next presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bruno. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to, sorry, I think it's better this way. So I'm going to talk about how to reduce greenhouse gas emission from fertilizer. So when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emission from fertilizer, we need to understand what are the major sources of emission when it comes to fertilizer-induced emission. So if you look at it, about 30 to 40% of the total fertilizer-induced emission is associated with production and transportation of the fertilizer itself, whereas 60 to 70% of the emission occurs when we apply those fertilizer into the field. So research and innovation around production as well as field application of the fertilizer has to be done in order to reduce fertilizer-induced greenhouse gas emission across the food value chain. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of what are the technology around that. So when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emission during the fertilizer production, specifically when we are talking about the nitrogen. So traditional way of producing nitrogen following the Haber-Bosch process is considered very energy intensive because it relies on the fossil fuel, and it emits a lot of greenhouse gases. Whereas green ammonia production, which is coming lately into the market, is it uses renewable energy for the production process, and it also uses hydrogen by the electrolysis of water. So it is also called zero carbon fertilizer production technology. There are some challenges for the uptake, but this is a kind of way forward when we are talking about greenhouse gas emission reduction from the fertilizer production technology. when it comes to the fertilizer application in the field, there are various technology that we can reduce fertilizer-induced greenhouse gas emission by manipulating the way that we apply fertilizer into the field. And I'm going to focus more on the later part of the technology. So there has been a lot of technology that has been developed, tested, and validated that has been proven to improve the nutrient use efficiency, improve the crop yield, reduce the fertilizer input, and at the same time reduce the environmental externalities, including greenhouse gas emission reduction. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before that, when we are talking about the fertilizer application around the global cropland, there is huge skewedness and disparity. There are a lot of areas around the globe where we apply far more amount of fertilizer than it is actually required for the crop yield. And that not only increases the cost of production, it also leads to various negative environmental externalities like water pollution, air pollution, and greenhouse gas emission. But at the same time, there are a lot of areas where farmers really struggle with the right access to fertilizer, and they apply far less amount of fertilizer, and that leads to soil mining, soil deterioration, and low yield. And that will lead to the vicious cycle of low soil productivity, low crop yield, and poverty, etc. Many parts in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, for example. So, just by improving nutrient use efficiency in a high production area globally, in a hypothetical scenario, and kind of reallocating that saving into the low input area would simply increase the global crop production by as high as 30% without additional fertilizer requirement. That's how we are operating. So in order to, if we could manage the fertilizer loss, but we need to constantly develop and promote the adoption of those technologies. So one of the technologies is, that I wanted to highlight here is what we call, use of decision support system to recommend fertilizer application in the smallholder production system. So in this case, I'm talking about the Nutrient Expert, which is a kind of, simple decision support tool wherein farmers can input the information like soil type, climate, and production condition. And based on that, it kind of gives fertilizer recommendation. And by using that recommendation, it will, we compare this Nutrient Expert based fertilizer recommendation with the existing farmers' practice of fertilizer management, and compare in terms of fertilizer input, crop yield, nutrient use efficiency, and greenhouse gas emission. So what I found through the 4 years of comparison, pair comparison over 1,600 pair comparison with Nutrient Expert and farmers' existing practice of fertilizer management is Nutrient Expert based fertilizer management would increase the crop yield with less nitrogen application, and that will translate into less greenhouse gas emission as compared to farmers' existing practice of fertilizer management, both in rice and and wheat, and both in high production input, high input production system as well as low input production system. And we did a kind of ex-ante analysis based on this preliminary finding. If this simple technology is taken in all rice wheat area in India, that will translate into additional grain production of 14 million ton with 1.4 million ton less nitrogen consumption. And that will translate into greenhouse gas emission reduction of about 5.34 million ton CO2 equivalent in 1 year. So by simple technology, for example. And then I just wanted to highlight another case of BNI, which is biological nitrification inhibition. So when we apply nitrogen into the field, it goes through a series of transformation like ammonification, nitrification, denitrification. And during this process, nitrogen is leaked either as nitrous oxide emission or nitrate leaching, specifically when there is a huge amount of nitrate in the soil. So basically, through the process of nitrogen management, we all know that the main approach is to reduce or slow down the process of nitrification so that you reduce the amount of nitrate at one time into the field, so that you slowly release the nitrogen in the nitrate from. Then plant can gradually take the nitrogen. It will increase the nitrogen use efficiency and reduce the loss by various means, emission as well as leaching, because nitrogen is leached as such, and it is also the substrate for denitrification induced nitrous oxide emission. So there has been nitrification inhibition inhibitor compound that has been developed, like synthetic nitrification inhibitors, but they are also expensive and it's not readily available for farmers also. Luckily, there are some plant material. They also segregate a kind of root exudates. They can also act just like synthetic nitrification inhibition to slow down the process of nitrification, so that it gradually releases the nitrogen into the soil stream and plant can take nitrogen, thereby increasing nitrogen use efficiency. So scientists has been able to translocate the gene that is responsible for slowing down the nitrification inhibition and kind of incorporate it into the commercial varieties of wheat. We call it BNI enabled wheat. And we tested the nitrification inhibition of BNI wheat in Mexico, in Summit, where I work in, for example. And based on that, the preliminary finding is that BNI enabled wheat would exhibit the nitrification inhibition property as the wild relative would. So it could reduce the nitrogen application by about 8 to 21% if it properly exhibits the BNI properties when it is grown in an appropriate environment. So based on that preliminary finding, this ex-ante studies also shows that this is the potential of nitrogen reduction through adoption of BNI-enabled wheat in the suitable area. I'm saying it in a suitable area because BNI-enabled wheat can express its BNI properties only on certain soil and environmental conditions, such as soil pH slightly acidic, somewhere between 5.5 to 6.5, and so on. So it cannot express its BNI activity across all the soil type. So just by adopting this BNI wheat, simple seed technology in the suitable wheat area would also lead to about greenhouse gas emission by about 15 million ton of CO2 equivalent, and it can reduce nitrogen leaching and runoff by about 1.32 million ton of nitrogen per year. So these are some of the technologies, but there are some challenges, whether it comes to the technologies around the production technology or field application of those fertilizers in order to reduce. And these are some of the action points that we have recommended. What we call is the breakthrough report that we had developed, for example. So some of them are around increasing the climate finance, for example. So given that agriculture and agri-food system is responsible for 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emission, it receives only 4% of the total climate funding, which is really a kind of not fair climate investment, not just investment, right? So increasing climate finance around agricultural technology is one area that we would recommend, for example. And I'm not going to read all the recommendations, but these are the recommendations for promoting sustainable technologies for reducing fertilizer-induced nitrous oxide emission across both on production as well as field application side. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sapkota, for the brilliant presentation. Dr. Sapkota is the leader of the Climate Change Group in CIMMYT and member of the Climate Investment Committee of CGIAR. So these were very insightful presentations, and since we are advanced in time, I'll welcome the debaters, the speakers from the next round, so you can follow a round of questions and answers, and perhaps we can bring everybody together by the end of the session. So I'll invite Dr. Ratan Lal, distinguished university professor of soil science at Ohio State University and adjunct professor of the University of Iceland and the Indian Agricultural Research Institute. Dr. Lal was laureated as member of the group that awarded the Nobel Prize in 2007 and also awarded with the World Food Prize in 2020, among other several prizes and awards. You are most welcome, Dr. Ratan Lal. Please. I would like also to welcome to the stage Dr. Eduardo Leão. Eduardo Leão is president of CropLife Brazil, and he's also a PhD in applied economics from the Escola Superior de Agricultura, Luiz de Queiroz, USP in Brazil. You're welcome. I also welcome to the stage Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim, which is the current Director of Technical Cooperation of the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation on Agriculture, ICA. It's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Ibrahim. We had excellent presentations and insightful presentations in the previous round of the debate. And now we are going to follow some comments from the speakers here. And to start with Dr. Ratanlal, in your opinion, how can biological inputs and efficient fertilizer use contribute not only to soil health, but also for greenhouse gas mitigation?
Thank you. Can I stand up and speak? I thought all those three presentations are outstanding, excellent, no question about that. Big problems require big solutions. I think that's very important part. We are using 200 million tons of fertilizer a year globally. And we have a presentation from Pakistan, from India, China, there was no presentation. Nitrogen use efficiencies in these countries where the fertilizer is being used heavily, 300 kilogram per hectare in North China Plain, up to 200 kilogram per hectare in Punjab. Efficiency is barely 30% at the most. 70% of what is put in is gone either in the atmosphere or in the groundwater or elsewhere. So if we have to use fertilizer in that way, the difference between the poison and medicine is the rate, the time of application, the method of application, and dose of application. There is no justification for that high rate if our use efficiency is that low. So the best thing to do is improve the use efficiency. And how can you do that? Improve soil health. That's number one part. And what is the heart of soil health? Is soil organic matter content. And the soil that we are talking about, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, China, organic carbon content ranges from 0.2% to 0.5% in the root zone. We take away everything. Take away the crop residue, burn some of it, feed the stubble, land is left to fend for itself. And then we complain use efficiency is low. And when the soil health is poor, you cannot substitute that by adding more and more and more fertilizers. So, all that science is outstanding. I salute you. Outstanding. But we need solution tomorrow. And we need solution later. So immediately improve the use efficiency. Cut down the rate. Apply properly. No broadcasting in standing water of rice paddies. You see that everywhere. No broadcasting of fertilizer. Apply that the way the medicine is to be given, not as a poison. On the long run, I know not many of you will agree what I'm going to say. 200 million tons of fertilizer. If we improve the use efficiency, over time, it should be reduced to 50 million tons. No more. Make a plan for each country, how to improve the efficiency. Now, while I'm at that part, irrigation water. We use 3,150 kilometer cube. Flood irrigation, developed 7,000-8,000 years ago. Drip fertigation, sub, put fertilizer and water together. 3,150 kilometer cube of water, changing to drip fertigation system, will come down to no more than 1,000 kilometer cube of water. Save water. At the same time, save fertilizer. So while we are at that part, we have cropland area of 1,500 million hectare. In Sub-Saharan Africa, the yield is 1,300 kilogram. Global average yield is 4,000. We can easily quadruple it. rather than adding more land, as I hear many times, return land back to nature. My suggestion will be from 1500 million hectare, use land properly, return half of it back to nature over time, not tomorrow morning, over time. Make a plan. We use 3,700 million hectare for grazing land. Cattle are very important. I'm not saying no. We need cattle, but no more than 1,500 million hectare. So if we return half of the land back to nature, put 2,500 million hectare back to nature for carbon sequestration, and pay farmers properly for the carbon they sequester in that land at $50 per credit. You can get 2 credits per hectare. We have 700 million farmers in the world. If we were to pay them properly and return land and water back to nature, it will require $100 billion per year just for agriculture. That's the only way agriculture can be transformed from a problem to a solution. You pay farmers, don't demand them without paying, and the problem will be solved. For this, you need Soil Health Act, you need Rights of Soil Act, and you need to make sure that agriculture and farmers are respected, not made second-class citizens. Then problem will be solved.
Great, thanks, Dr. Lau. That was very insightful, a very good argument representing the academia. And now going to the private sector, I'll pass the word to Dr. Eduardo Leão. Dr. Eduardo, what are the prospects for market growth and private investment in bioinputs? Can you share a little bit of information and your opinion and insights about that?
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, everybody. It's difficult to talk after Professor Ratan, but basically what I'd like to bring to you today is some of our Brazilian experience using bioinputs. And I'd like to first to add on the major discussion of this debate, which is the nitrogen fixation. And in this case, just looking at soybeans in Brazil, more than 90% of current soybean producers utilize this technique, which represented in the last 10 years a avoidance of around 200 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere. But I would like to go beyond the biofertilizer discussion and bring a little bit a larger picture related to bioinputs, considering crop protection, biopesticides, bioherbicides, and bionematicides. Nowadays in Brazil, if you don't consider biofertilizer, just bio crop protection, we are talking about more than 25% of current area that already utilizes some level of bioinputs. And important to mention that in the Brazilian case, bioinputs have been used in large-scale crops, like soybean, like corn, cotton, sugarcane for many, many decades, orange, and fruits, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, it represents a total market of $1 billion. But when we look ahead, the level of growth in Brazil has been significant. If you look at the last 3 years, we have had an annual growth rate of 21% in the average, 21%, which is around 4 times current growth worldwide annual growth rate. So we nowadays, we've been using, considering total bioinputs use, bio crop protection represents around 80% of total use. So we are extremely excited about that. We and as Brazilian Crop Life, we represent four sectors, which is pesticide, bio inputs, biotechnology, and germplasm. So these are the four, let's say, one of the four major technologies, and which basically have high complementarity. Sometimes they substitute each other, because we believe that nowadays there's no space for one unique solution for complex problems. We have to work with multiple solutions to make sure that we have a best environmental and economic solution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eduardo. Now I'll go to Dr. Ibrahim to talk a little bit how AICA can support the expansion of the adoption of biological inputs and best practice for fertilizer use, leading to nitrous oxide emissions mitigation in agriculture. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this. And also, I think the three presentations are very good. Serve as a basis of providing more scientific evidence of how you translate that into policies. Now, based on this, ICA has created a bioeconomy group in which we have a unit on bioinputs, specifically in this area, working towards to enhance the implementation of bioinputs in agriculture, but also to respond to what consumers are looking for responsible production, reducing pesticides, reducing fertilizers, and reducing the negative impacts on the environment. Now, we have worked to create a hemispheric program, hemispheric network, with several partners working to look at bioinputs, which has been working to promote scientific and technological development of bioinputs as one of the main objectives. A second objective is to strengthen and harmonize regulatory frameworks. We think that's something that we need to put more attention on. What are the regulatory frameworks in which each of the countries, what are the experiences, and how can we learn and share and set the agenda for the research that we have, and what policies you're going to move into these regulatory frameworks. And another objective was to support the sectorial financing for bioinputs and facilitate knowledge management. How do you share the knowledge within the farmers and the private sector of the information, collate the information on what are the scientific evidence, which is showing the competing claims of impacts on productivity, the environment, and what are the climate change benefits that we're getting from these areas. One of the things we have done also is to work with the countries when you're looking at the policies on setting the NDCs to promote what we call the NAMAS for livestock, or NAMAS for coffee or cocoa and bananas, which integrates the use of bioinputs as a way of achieving the objectives of the NDC goals that the countries have, as a way of promoting and using this evidence. Some key actions we have been taking up in the hemispheric bioinput platform was expanding the development process and generating evidence of bioinputs application results. I think if this is going to be functional, we need a stable supply. We need to make sure that the quality is a standardization of the quality of the products that we produce, and also look at the regulatory frameworks that I mentioned. These are key factors that are important. We also been promoting standardization in the process and research, raising awareness and advocacy for public policies, and to inform decision-making and regulatory frameworks on this information. We also have been systemizing and disseminating adaptable and replicable financing mechanisms across countries and the region, and strengthening professional and technical capacities. We have a course, we have a diploma we have been using to train the experts, the extension workers, but also we're using digital technologies also to promote a more cascade model of how farmers can have more access to the information, but also use it more in precision agriculture and application into different farming systems that they're working on. We at ICA have a keen interest to look at family agriculture, and that's where we see at a small scale the application of bioinputs as important. And also at ICA, we've been showcasing successful cases of bioinputs adoption, but also piloting at scale in different countries. We work in 34 countries in the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, and working in different agroecological conditions, how you apply bioinputs, and to look at the experiences and how can you scale up these experiences with the impacts on policies and impacts on alliance with the private sector. One of the recommendations I will make based on what I've seen in the presentations is that we have noticed that many of the native grasses also have got this biological nitrogen fixation, like the paspalum, and I think we might want to explore beyond of the exotic species we're working on, looking at some of these native species that we're working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Ibrahim. That's very impressive. And I'll get back to Dr. Lau. And Dr. Lau, perhaps you can explain to us a little bit more about a state of art and how the academia is dealing with the current gaps and the most recent innovations on biological inputs and nitrous oxide mitigation, including efficient use of fertilizers and contributions to soil health.
I think N2O is obviously was mentioned, 273 global warming potential is a very important greenhouse gas, and agriculture is the source of the greenhouse gas. So somehow improving the efficiency is really the best option. We can change formulation, maybe some coating on the urea and others. Ammonia injection can also be a problem, like I mentioned, broadcasting in rice paddy and so forth. The key is to find out how to improve the use efficiency. Biological nitrogen fixation in grasses, mentioned also the Brazilian work, Dr. Johannes de Bruyne. I asked him to, I knew her very well. In fact, in the 70s, she used to talk about Paspalum notatum grass fixing nitrogen, which was a really very high input. So using biological nitrogen fixation, certainly, but N2O emission does happen also from biological nitrogen fixation. Any nitrogen happen. So the key issue is improving soil health. And one of the key components of improving soil health, as I mentioned, soil organic matter content, but nobody yet mentioned, I think agroforestry, we heard excellent presentation from Dr. Ibrahim today, agroforest. Conservation agriculture. Brazil has done outstanding work, better so than the United States. It's a real no-till, so I salute you guys for doing that. In the US, it is 1 year chisel till and 1 year no-till, and it should be continuous no-till. Conservation agriculture, leaving the crop residue on. And if farmers do good things like that, leave the crop residue, grow a cover crop in the off-season, I think the focus is not to produce maximum yield, but the focus is to produce optimum yield while sustaining productivity of the soil productivity over a long period of time. And under those conditions, if the farmers are taking risk of 10% lower yield, that is where the society should be willing to pay them, reward them for ecosystem services. So fertilizer use is essential. Africa especially only 20 kilogram per hectare, world average 140. So in Africa it should be increased, but in Asia definitely should be decreased, South Asia and China. But elsewhere where the fertilizer are not being used properly, improved, but improve the use efficiency of this kind. But make sure that the farmers are given the technology, and if they do better agriculture and mitigate climate change, improve water quality, live in harmony with nature, not fighting with nature, I think this is the way society has to let farmers know we support you. And I mentioned $100 billion. I think it should come from including the consumers, also agro-industry, also oil exporting countries. All of those should contribute toward that. So it is definitely, I'm very optimistic that if we determine to solve the problem, we can, and we should.
Thank you, Dr. Ratanlao. I completely agree that to drive climate action in agriculture, we should put the farmer's perspective in the heart of policy design and bring them as allies. They are the ones that are really implementing the action, so that is vital for the success. And getting back here to Dr. Eduardo, Dr. Lau has just mentioned the perspective, the view, and the pathway that we should go to implement those actions in agriculture. And what are the barriers from the private sector point of view that we face to really increase the adoption of those technologies, including biological inputs and more efficient fertilizers?
Well, that's a very good question. And I would identify at least three major reasons for as barriers to amplify the use of bioinputs. I think the first one is a natural resistance of producers. So they've been used to produce in certain way for many years, for decades, and sometimes it's difficult to change the technology, even because in some reasons bioinputs are not as the result is not as quickly as it is in chemical use. But I think that the best way to do that is when the farmers start to see their neighbors utilizing and have good results, not necessarily in the short run, but in the medium and long run. I think that this is the first barrier. Second one is something that Dr. Ibrahim has mentioned, which is related to training and qualification to use, because it has its own complexities, its own specificities. So it's very important that farmers are well trained to not only to use it, but also to manipulate, to transport, to store. So I guess that this is another very important aspect to be considered. And finally, last but not least, is the existence of a sound regulatory framework. I think that this is also very important. In Brazil, we've been facing such a situation. Nowadays, the bioinputs are under the legislation of pesticides, and which obviously do not clearly consider the specificities of the bioinput. So we are currently working on a specific regulatory framework for bioinputs. I guess that, and I hope that by the end of this year, we should have approved in the Congress a new legislation which will allow, including the firms, to be more motivated to invest in new technologies. Normally, according to our estimates, to develop a new bioinput, we are talking about 5 to 6 years and at least $10 million of investment for these new technologies. So we have to have a sound and long-term perspective, so that you can be motivated to invest in something that will just give the results in 5, 6, 7 years. So I think that this would be, from my perspective, three of the major barriers to increase the larger use of bioinputs.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Eduardo. It's good that you have mentioned about the regulatory framework, and that connects with the previous answer given by Dr. Ibrahim here, and perhaps international cooperation can help that as well. And seeing those good examples from one country, and perhaps that could lead to insights into implementing better regulatory frameworks in other regions. And regarding that, I would just I would like to see if Dr. Aziz is still with us online, because we have just spoken about the challenge and the barriers from the private sector perspective, especially in Brazil. And Dr. Aziz could talk about the key challenge that South Asia faces in mitigating nitrous oxide emissions. Perhaps is Dr. Aziz online yet? If he's not,
Yeah.
okay, we can follow from here.
Yeah.
So I'll follow with Dr. Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim, how can we strengthen the international cooperation and especially unlock finance? Finance is the key thematic that we are discussing here during the negotiations in COP29. And in your opinion, how we can unlock finance to leverage the adoption of those sustainable technologies?
Thank you. Well, ICA has a program which is looking at partnerships, building partnerships at different scales with international, regional, and national levels. Understanding the need to have the partnerships for scaling up the technologies, but also working together to look at policies. I think what my colleagues mentioned about, we need to look at what are the barriers for adopting these technologies. And if we can remove those barriers, of course, we can convince the bankers what is the business case that we need to invest in bioinputs in these areas. So I think those are some examples. A few weeks ago, ICA organized a joint initiative in the COP16. That was 2 weeks ago in Cali, in Colombia, in which we discussed how can we apply the use of scale up more, the use of bioinputs with many of our stakeholders and the private banks working together to look at what are the business case we're going to present to them. So I think, getting the data, getting the information, what are the metrics we're going to use to evaluate the impacts of the use of bioinputs. This will be important for convincing the donors and also the bankers for investing and providing credits to farmers for transitioning in towards more from an inorganic to more bioinputs use on the farms that they're working on. And of course, setting up some of the model farms and demonstration farms, which long term will be very important, and providing the tools that the farmers and the communities need. But also, I think engaging the farmers' organizations, the big organizations will be very important also. We will look at the connectivity and linking the private and public sector together.
All right, very interesting, Dr. Ibrahim. And Dr. Aziz, I can see you connected now. Thank you. Sorry, because I didn't follow the script, so that was the moderator's fault. But I'll leave you the floors to answer what are the key challenges that South Asia faces in mitigating nitrous oxide emissions, and what is the current status of those emissions in the region.
Thank you, Bruno. This is really very interesting, particularly being a South Asian and representing the International Nitrogen Initiative for this region. As it's clear that South Asia holds about 4.8% of the land surface and have 25% of the population. So ecosystem services are under severe pressure here in South Asia. And the economy and the food security of South Asia rely heavily on agriculture, with many farmers depending on nitrogen-intensive fertilizers to boost crop yields. Because food security is one of the major issues, this has led to excessive nitrogen applications, resulting in higher nitrous oxide emissions, resulting in a very low nitrogen use efficiency. Just Dr. Ratan has already discussed on South Asia. So technologies that help reduce nitrous oxide emissions, such as precision agriculture, enhanced efficiency fertilizers, advanced soil management techniques, are often costly. And the most important, soil organic matter level in South Asia is quite low, seriously low. So many farmers in South Asia, especially small landholders, these cannot afford these technologies without government subsidies or support. So policy fragmentation is another issue, and insufficient financial support hinders large-scale adoption of effective practices. And several initiatives are underway to address these emissions at regional level, such as the development of national nitrogen action plans under the UNE resolutions framework, and the participation in South Asia Nitrogen Hub, which was a funded project from the UK, and the regional cooperation with South Asia Cooperative Environment Program, SACEP. We are working towards development of roadmap for the sustainable nitrogen management in the region. And South Asia, however, significant challenges remain implementing and scaling up these efforts to achieve meaningful reductions in nitrous oxide emissions. And we are hopeful that we are on the way, and we will do it. Of course, the technical and financial resources are needed to implement all of these strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aziz. So I'll get back to Dr. Lau. Dr. Lau, regarding cooperation between academia, private sector, and international institutions, how we can overcome some of the barriers that were mentioned here today and put that in an accelerated pathway of action?
Thank you. I think the private sector can really play a very important role. Private sector can, of course, bring the inputs to smallholder farmer that we are talking about, South Asia, Africa, Central America, Caribbean, and so forth. Private sector can bring the education part that Dr. Ibrahim mentioned, very important, creating awareness, improving education, providing scholarships. Private sector could do that. Private sector could also provide support to farmers. We are talking about carbon credits or payment for ecosystem services. So private sector and public sector together could certainly improve the cooperation that we need from farmers. But our goal is to make sure that the farmers are at the center of it and they feel respected and fully rewarded for that. And if I may add one more last thing about that, I mentioned good work done in India and South Asia that we heard from both countries, Pakistan and India today. In 1918, there was a British couple of scientists. One was Sir Albert Howard. He was then president of India Science Academy. And there was a lady, her name was Eve Balfour. And Sir Albert Howard gave a lecture to India Science Academy. It was called One Health Concept. And the reason I'm mentioning One Health, since the Food System Summit and since the COVID situation and animal and human health, it became very common. One Health means animal health and human health are related. But Sir Albert Howard said, health of soil, plants, animal, people, environment, and the planet is interconnected. And Balfour wrote a book on that, One Health Concept, going back to 1920s. So we really have to go back to our roots. How could we relate soil health to plant, animal, planetary processes, and human health together? And that is where the cooperation between private sector, public sector, and scientific community is very critical.
Very good. Very, very rich argument here. I'll also pass here to Dr. Eduardo. He can talk a little bit his perspective on how we can enhance this cooperation between academia, private sector, and international organizations.
Thank you. I think that there are many ways to do that. And I'm going to give some examples that we've been working together with research centers and universities. Embrapa, represented here by Dr. Marcelo Morandi, is a very good example. Embrapa, which is a public research center in Brazil, has held a very important set of cooperations with CropLife to develop, to support the development of new technologies. This has also taken place with other of our member companies. So I think that this is first one very important approach to research centers and university. So I think that's a two-way game. Private sector can support many research, but also research centers, universities can also focus on some more practical research, so that it can be actually at the end, as Dr. Ratana has mentioned, at the end of the day, we are looking at benefiting producers, smallholders, so it's very important to better understand what are their actual needs. I think that also it's very important to have a good cooperation with governments so that this will facilitate not only what I have just mentioned about legal frameworks, but also some strategic plans or programs. And you are an example at a Brazilian Ministry of Agriculture that has this very interesting program to support agricultural activities that reduce CO2 emissions, provide more incentives for credit, which has been something very successful. And you've been leading this program in Ministry of Agriculture. So I guess that this is a very interesting example. Finally, I think regarding some international organizations, as you have mentioned, I think IICA is clearly a very interesting example. And one of them I have also mentioned here, and you have mentioned as well, Ibrahim, regarding the training and qualification of farmers. But also there are other ways that could be that the agriculture could benefit from, which is, for instance, financing from development banks like World Bank. We've been, I see that, for instance, IFC from the World Bank has been very interested in looking at this area of bioinputs, and other development banks that could be more focused on this area through a more strict cooperation with private sector.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Eduardo. Now to Dr. Ibrahim, it's actually your specialty cooperation. I'll leave you the floor to talk to us how we can cooperate even more and accelerate that.
Thank you. Let me start to say that when Latin America accounts for more than 20% of the markets for bioinputs today, and it's a growing market. It's projected to reach up to 35% by 2030. So we see a demand there. But the question is, if we increase the demand tomorrow, can we have the supply to what the private sector is using for? And so we need to look at the market and supply and demand. And how do we work together to look at the regulatory framework, which is important, and the enabling policy environment for the private sector to operate and to take uptake of these technologies that we're thinking about in terms of innovation. So I think the awareness and advocacy is very important, especially to the policymakers who are making decisions, and those promoting more intersectoral policies. The policies on climate change is more within the environmental ministries. And if we're going to look at the application with the agriculture sector, how do you bring these different actors together and looking at a harmonized policy? And perhaps one of the things we can do is bundle the payment for ecosystem services, which would include the carbon markets, but also the avoided emissions for nitrous oxide, etc., which is promoting a compensation for the farmers for the efforts in using bioinputs, and also looking at the carbon market, which integrates all the reduction of the emissions that we have got. A country like Costa Rica, which I work on, is advancing in the payment for ecosystem services, which they call the second generation for payment of ecosystem services, which is including soils. And Professor Ratanlal is an advisor to the Living Soils, together with my colleague Francisco Melo, who's present here also in this meeting. Capacity building, of course, is very important. Policy and regulatory framework, we mentioned that. And I think we need to promote more the bioinnovation concept, looking at a more business entrepreneurship. How can we promote more incubators, integrated women, youths, more inclusive policies, and incentives for these to be engaged and creating what we will call this multiple circle economy, where you have several segments of the different value chains within the sectors that we're working on, are some of the examples where we see we can advance and accelerate the implementation of the use of bioinputs in this context.
Thanks very much, Dr. Ibrahim. Before passing to the speakers here and also to the presenters of the first round for a couple of minutes of concluding remarks, I'll ask for the audience if there is any question they would give to our speakers. If not, I'll pass to Dr. Lau and then to all the speakers here to give the concluding remarks. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. I would like to mention that soil degradation, recent estimate from UNEP is 40% of land area of the earth is degraded. And soil degradation or climate change are mutually reinforcing process. Soil is a source of gases when it's degraded, and of course that causes global warming, and global warming increases the risks of soil degradation. So somewhere along the line we have to make sure that this vicious cycle is broken, and therefore improving soil health is really the key issue. And building organic matter content, which is the major issue throughout the developing countries. Somewhere the farmers have to be assured that they'll be rewarded if they restore soil health through improving soil organic matter content. So regional, national, international Soil Health Act, and coming back to what Dr. Ibrahim said, living soil. Soils are living things, and therefore a living entity has rights, right to be fed properly. So soil organism in soil have to be fed. That means the crop residue must go to the land. And that can be only translated, grains are for people, residue for the soil. And that equity we must maintain.
I completely agree. So I'll pass to Dr. Eduardo for his final remarks.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to talk to this audience and this very good discussion here. And say that indeed bioinputs is for sure something, it's like a hot topic to be discussed, and definitely part of the solution for producers, for the environment. And we have to admit that we still have challenges to be solved. We have discussed some of them in this panel, but bioinputs has been proven as a technology that really reduces the environmental impact, and also has been proven as a technology that has economic viability. So it's something that has to be incentivized by governments, by private sector, by academia, research centers, and still there's much to be talked about. So thank you very much again, and I hope that we can continue this discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eduardo. Now, Dr. Ibrahim, your final remarks.
Well, I think each Lancet report, each Lancet 2.0, has brought out the importance of a reconfiguration of the food system if we want to attend the triple planetary crisis that has been discussed. This together with the drivers where consumers are driving change, they're looking for more sustainable consumption patterns. It's also looking at sustainable trade. You can see the European Union looking at the UEDR, zero deforestation. It's also on the limit for the residues and pesticides, but also coming on the cross-border emissions in this case. And those factors or those drivers are also creating a demand for bioinputs, which we have seen from the presentations we have here today. Very good presentations of the evidence where bioinputs can contribute to improving productivity, but also at the same time contributing to reducing the emissions. However, we need to look at what are the conditions, what are the barriers, how can you accelerate the production, how can you increase the supply, a stable supply, and those are some key aspects that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim. Now I'll get back online with Dr. Aziz and leave you for your final remarks, Dr. Aziz.
First of all, I'm very thankful to the organizers for inviting me on this August panel and the discussion. Particularly, I'm very happy to have to share with Professor Ratanlal from South Asia and all of those. Regarding the final comments, there is quite huge differences between some of the problems between developed and the developing countries. Like in some countries, there is over use of fertilizers, particularly in India, South Asia, China, and some of the other countries. While in Africa, or some other countries, there is a very less use of fertilizers. So food security is another issue, as well as we have to consider the environmental sustainability. So what we can do is the regional cooperation. The regional collaboration or the cooperation can be highly effective in sustainable nitrogen management by fostering shared strategies, resources, and knowledge among neighboring countries facing similar agricultural or environmental challenges. So regional collaboration can support data sharing, joint capacity building programs that train local farmers, extension workers, and policymakers in best practices for nitrogen management and nitrous oxide mitigations. And previously, the nitrogen was not visible in many of the Sustainable Development Goal targets, but it's good that it is now under discussion and people have recognized its importance. And by establishing the regional nitrous oxide monitoring system, countries can track emissions more effectively and hold one another accountable to shared targets. So this cooperation fosters transparency and ensures that all countries in the region are contributing towards emissions reductions, creating a balanced approach that limits emissions leakage across the borders and eventually contributing towards the global goals like Kunming Montreal Target 7, which says that we have to reduce pollution by 50% by 2030. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aziz, for your comments and for the brilliant presentation today. Now I'll call Dr. Sapkota to give the final comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Okay. So 2 minutes, and I would like to touch upon two areas here. So basically, Dr. Ibrahim also said that there is no single bullet, there is no single solution. So we need to look after all possible solutions. So soil health is key, but we need to look after all the solutions of 4R we all talk about, right? Using the right source of fertilizer at the right rate, applying at the right time of the plant, uptake, using the right method in the right place so that, nutrient use efficiency can be improved. But I would like to highlight that this 4R nutrient stewardship should be combined with right agronomy, for example. A lot of evidences around the world that we have seen is that if you are adopting this 4R nutrient stewardship, for example, with right agronomy, planting at the right time, or combining with, various cropping system, integrating legume into the system, or recycling the residues and making use of all those organic sources, combining inorganic fertilizer input with the organic input. This whole sort of things has a lot of advantage as compared to just applying the fertilizer. So we should not think only around the fertilizer management technology, but also the agronomic technology, which is also part of the fertilizer management technology. That's one point that I wanted to highlight. Now, having said that, all these innovations and technology, when there are a lot of barriers and challenges, as we have all talked about, for example, one is the cost of implementing, upfront cost for establishing all these, new products, or even green fertilizer, for example. It has upfront cost. So we need to think about financing around that. And then we we talked about the data. I think Dr. Aziz mentioned about the data, for example. So having right data and sharing among the stakeholders in order to pinpoint where should we focus our nutrient, specific nutrient management strategy based on what are being applied, what is the current level of nutrient use efficiency, what is the nutrient supplying capacity of the soil, and in order to design the nutrient management strategy accordingly is very important. And kind of developing global data sets on the NUE and sharing with the stakeholder in order to prioritize nutrient management work is another area of the work that we need to think about. And then when it comes to financing those kind of things, as we talked about, carbon credit could be the one thing, but we should not really burden our farmers for this kind of public benefit that we are talking about. So as Dr. Ratan Lal rightly said, that farmers should be compensated for what they are doing for the environment. So there has to be some mechanism. So all these kind of counterproductive policies to support only for the inorganic source of fertilizer has to be gone out, and then there has to be repurposing those financial subsidies for integrated fertility management that will help not only production but also soil and environment going forward. And then coming to the carbon credit, it is very fantastic, and then carbon credit has been kind of implementation of carbon credit mechanism has been approved in COP29 at the very beginning, which is very great. But when it comes to smallholder production system, let's think about the transaction cost of verification, monitoring, reporting and verification MRB system. So if farmers are going to get a small credit and that's going to cost more cost in order to verify what they have really been adopted, it's not going to benefit them. So we need to really think about how to make this MRB system really cost effective for farmers to get whatever benefit that we really want to give it to farmer. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sapkota. Really, repurposing subsidies is key for us to pave a pathway cost-effective for farmers to drive the sustainability change. Now, I'll leave to Dr. Morandi for his final comments.
Thank you, Bruno. It was a great pleasure to share this panel here with so distinguished panelists. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. I think that we have here a key issue that was bring here today, that is the soil health. And the soil health, it's a key issue to the best use of bioinputs to improve adaptation and resilience of agriculture to climate change. And once we have health soil and adapted production, you can produce food to feed people and biomass to feed soil and to feed nature. Yeah, so it's everything really connected to that. So the research that we are doing to improve bioinputs, to improve microorganisms to make this role on nature is dependent of soil health, because they work better on soil on health soils. So I think that this everything that was said here in this panel is everything connects. So and I think that the best way to advance that is to connect the private sector, the academy, the research institutions, and the international organizations, and the whole society, and the farmers, of course, in the center of that, so we can advance. But agriculture has an important role on mitigation, because it can sequester carbon, you can reduce emissions, but this is only possible if you have adaptation and resilience, because if we stop or reduce production of food and feed for the soil, it's not possible to mitigate through agriculture. So agriculture can be a part of solution, but to do that must be very well adapted and resilient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morandi. And I'm really grateful for all the speakers here today. I welcome the audience to applaud them, and we are sharply on time to end this wonderful session. Thank you very much.